My name is Ellie. I'm 27 years old, an investigative journalist working for the Beacon in Chicago, a city that never sleeps, and neither do the secrets buried beneath its polished skyline. I have spent the better part of my youth chasing the truth, peeling away glossy veneers to expose the rot hidden underneath. But before I ever became a hunter of other people's lies, I was forced to live inside my own. My life has always been shadowed by the weight of family, by a mother whose grip on outdated ideals could strangle the air from a room, and by a sister who chose submission over freedom. My mother, Margaret, is 52, a high school teacher who believes tradition is the only compass a woman should follow. She wrapped herself in dogma like armor, and she wrapped me and my sister in it too, whether we wanted it or not. Olivia, my elder by 3 years, works at a bank, perfectly groomed for a life of dependence, carrying forward every rigid lesson Margaret ever carved into her. This story is not just about them. It is about me, about how I stopped being the family's punching bag, how betrayal cut me deeper than I thought possible, and how, against all odds, I clawed my way back toward light through a labyrinth of schemes I never imagined could touch my life. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The early days inside my family cage. From the time I was a child, life inside our home felt less like a place of warmth and more like a carefully constructed prison. My mother, Margaret, turned every corner of the house into a rehearsal stage, preparing my sister Olivia and me for the roles she believed women were destined to play. To her, womanhood was not a spectrum of possibilities, it was a rigid script written sometime in the 1950s, and any deviation from that script was a disgrace. Each morning began with rituals that felt more like drills than lessons. Olivia and I would walk around the living room balancing stacks of heavy books on our heads while carrying trays of steaming food. Our tiny hands trembled as the plates wobbled, the heat rising into our faces, but there was no mercy. Margaret would stand by, arms folded, eyes sharp like a warden waiting for the inevitable mistake. If even a drop spilled, the punishment was swift and humiliating. We had to scrub the kitchen floor-to-ceiling mirrors with toothbrushes, our small fingers red and raw from cold water and harsh soap. I remember crouching there, tears burning my eyes, whispering to myself that this couldn't possibly be what childhood was meant to feel like. Nights were worse. Most children drifted into sleep with lullabies or fairy tales. Not us. Margaret had her own bedtime stories, scripts of submission she forced us to memorize. She would sit at the edge of our beds, her voice sharp, demanding we repeat phrases over and over. "My love is the one who decides. I'm sorry for speaking out." Or "I only want to make him happy." I said the words because defiance meant harsher punishment, but even as a child I felt a sickness in my stomach. It was as if every time I repeated those lines, something inside me died a little more. Olivia, however, embraced them. She absorbed each phrase like a sponge, her eyes shining with a kind of blind devotion, as if she truly believed this was the destiny of a good woman. By the time Olivia turned 16, her transformation was complete. She had molded herself into the perfect servant, not for Margaret, but for a man named Tom. He was 32, twice her age, a controlling engineer who saw in Olivia exactly what Margaret had designed, a pliant, eager-to-please girl who lived to serve him. While my peers were worrying about math tests and prom dresses, Olivia was ironing Tom's shirts, preparing his lunches, and tucking little notes into his bag. Notes that read, "I live to make you happy," or "You are everything to me." Instead of being horrified, Margaret celebrated. She clapped her hands with joy, as if Olivia had passed some sacred rite of passage. She even rewarded her with a $300 coffee machine, beaming with pride as though this expensive token proved Olivia's worth as a woman. To my mother, servitude wasn't a tragedy, it was an achievement. But I was not like Olivia. Maybe I couldn't be. Something in me rebelled against the script, a quiet fire that refused to die even when Margaret tried to stamp it out. I chose another path. Books became my sanctuary, my escape route. I studied relentlessly, pouring myself into schoolwork, joining every extracurricular activity I could find, debate team, school paper, volunteering. My teachers adored me. They saw me as bright, disciplined, destined for something bigger. I clung to their praise like a lifeline, proof that I could be more than what Margaret told me I was. Eventually, my efforts paid off. I won a scholarship to study journalism at the University of Chicago, a dream I had dared to nurture in secret, away from Margaret's disapproving glare. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I remember running into the kitchen, breathless, the envelope still warm from my hands. I laid it before Margaret like a trophy, expecting just this once a flicker of pride. But she didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She didn't even glance at the words on the page. Instead, her lips twisted into that familiar smirk, the one that cut deeper than any slap. "Good," she said flatly. "But why waste time on books when you should be finding a decent man to take care of you?" Then, with one casual flick of her wrist, she dropped my acceptance letter into the trash can. The sound of the paper hitting the bin echoed in my chest like a death knell. She hadn't just thrown away a letter. She had dismissed my dream, my effort, my escape. In that moment, I realized Margaret didn't want daughters. She wanted disciples. And I was failing her test by daring to imagine a future of my own. The breaking point came 2 years later, just before I left for college. I was 18, already packing my bags, holding tight to the fragile hope that once I stepped out of that house, I would never again be forced into rehearsing lines of obedience. But that night when I came home, I saw Olivia in the kitchen. She tried to hide her face from me, but I noticed it instantly, the purple bruise blooming across her cheek, clumsily concealed with cheap foundation from the Dollar Tree. I froze. My heart sank into my stomach. My hands shook as I reached out and whispered, "Olivia, what happened?" She laughed, a sound so brittle it felt like glass breaking. "Tom just got a little carried away," she said, brushing her hair over the bruise. "He loves me too much, that's all. He can't control himself when he sees me looking so beautiful." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to drag her out of that house and away from that man. But she looked at me with a mixture of pity and scorn, as though I was the foolish one for not understanding the twisted logic Margaret had drilled into us. In that moment, I knew I had lost her. Olivia wasn't just my sister anymore. She was Margaret's perfect creation, a puppet dancing on the strings of toxic devotion. I stood there, powerless, while the walls of our house pressed in around me, suffocating with the weight of tradition, obedience, and betrayal. I knew then that leaving for college wasn't just about chasing a dream. It was about survival. If I stayed, I would end up just like Olivia, bruised, obedient, erased. But if I left, I had a chance, however small, to rewrite the script Margaret had forced upon us. And so I carried that moment with me, burned into my memory, my sister's bruised face, her twisted smile, and the chilling realization that I was walking away not just from my home, but from the only family I had ever known. The journey toward freedom. For most of my early 20s, freedom was not something I lived, it was something I fantasized about. And yet, in my desperate attempt to appease Margaret, I willingly shackled myself to another cage. His name was Ryan, a 29-year-old security guard whose entire personality revolved around control. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. His insistence that I text him when I got home, his habit of scrolling through my messages under the guise of protection. But it grew. Soon he demanded full access to my phone. Then he installed a location-sharing app that tracked me 24 hours a day. He decided which friends I could see, which events I could attend, and even what I wore on nights out. His world swallowed mine until I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. I had studied enough stories of abuse to recognize the signs. But Margaret's voice still lived inside me, whispering that compliance equaled love, that sacrifice proved worth. And so, one Thanksgiving, I brought Ryan home. I will never forget the expression on Margaret's face, the radiant smile, the arms that wrapped around me for the first time in 4 years. In that brief embrace, I felt like a starving child being handed scraps of food. I mistook it for love. I thought, foolishly, that I had finally earned her approval. But illusions never last. 3 years passed. I clawed my way through college, earning a journalism degree with honors. I sat in therapy sessions week after week, peeling away the layers of trauma that had calcified inside me since childhood. And for the first time, I began to see myself clearly. I wasn't a servant. I wasn't a puppet. I was a woman with a voice, and that voice mattered. It was during this fragile rebirth that I met Lucas. He was 33, a senior editor at a magazine where I interned, with an easy kindness that disarmed me. He had grown up as the eldest brother to 3 younger sisters, and it showed in the way he listened, the way he respected boundaries without being asked, the way he treated me not as an accessory but as an equal. Lucas never demanded my location, never rifled through my phone. Instead, he asked about my writing, encouraged my ideas, and celebrated my wins. For the first time, I felt seen not as an extension of someone else's expectations, but as myself. When Lucas held me, I did not feel caged. I felt free. By the time Christmas arrived, we were inseparable. Lucas had become both anchor and lighthouse, a steady presence guiding me toward a life I once thought unreachable. And I wanted my family, even Margaret, to see that happiness was possible for me. I wanted to show them love could look different, that it didn't have to be bruises disguised as passion or obedience mistaken for virtue. Lucas reassured me endlessly. "It'll be okay, Ellie," he whispered as he brushed my hair back before the trip. "They may not understand right away, but they'll see how much you mean to me." His confidence gave me courage. When we pulled up to Margaret's house, I was nervous but strangely calm. I walked up to the door with my head high, my heart beating steady. For once, I believed I could face them without shrinking. But the moment Olivia opened the door, all of that confidence shattered. She looked like a ghost of herself. Her eyes were hollowed, circled with bruised shadows. A fresh mark, dark and angry, spread across her neck. She limped as though each step hurt. My breath caught in my throat. "Olivia," I whispered, but before I could say more, her gaze flicked to Lucas helping me out of my coat. Her lips curled in a bitter smile. "Ellie," she murmured, voice hoarse, "you make him lose face when you shine like this." My chest tightened. She wasn't just broken, she was convinced her suffering was noble. Margaret's lessons still owned her completely. Lucas, ever the gentleman, extended his hand and introduced himself warmly. He spoke proudly of my latest investigative piece, his voice filled with admiration. For a moment, I thought maybe his sincerity might pierce through Margaret's armor. But instead, her face twisted with fury. She lunged forward, gripping my wrist so hard I gasped. "You ungrateful daughter," she hissed, her voice cracking into a scream. "You've destroyed every value I taught you." Her eyes darted to my left hand, and then she saw it. The diamond ring Lucas had slipped onto my finger only weeks before, the symbol of our future. Margaret's face contorted. With a feral snarl, she clawed at my hand, trying to rip the ring off. Her nails dug into my skin as she twisted and yanked. Pain shot through me. My finger swelled, turned purple, and then the skin split, blood welling up as I cried out. "Stop! You're hurting her!" Lucas shouted, grabbing her wrist, but Margaret was wild, stronger than I had ever seen her. Olivia rushed forward, clutching me tightly, her voice frantic. "Mama, please! Stop! Don't hurt her!" But Margaret's screams drowned out everything. "She's corrupted you. Margaret shrieked, her spit flecking my face. "She's ruined you both. You were supposed to keep yourself pure." The room spun. I struggled for air, for clarity. Lucas had his phone out now, calling 911, his voice steady but urgent as he gave our address. But Margaret wasn't done. She tore herself free and stormed into the kitchen. When she turned back, a gleam of steel flashed in her hand, a kitchen knife. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then she charged, her eyes fixed on Lucas. "No!" I screamed, stumbling forward despite the pain in my mangled hand. Lucas backed away, his arms raised in defense, but Margaret's fury was unrelenting. Just as she lunged, the wail of police sirens split the night. Red and blue lights bled through the curtains. The front door burst open, officers shouting commands. Margaret froze, knife still raised, her chest heaving. The spell broke. Within seconds, she was restrained, her screams muffled under the weight of authority. I collapsed into Lucas's arms, my body trembling, my hand throbbing with pain. Blood soaked through the fabric of my sleeve. One officer knelt beside me, calling for an ambulance. Another retrieved the knife from the floor. Olivia sobbed quietly in the corner, her body shaking as though she had been ripped in two. The hospital, doctors worked to set my dislocated finger, wrapping it in gauze to stem the bleeding. I lay there staring at the ceiling, numb, as Lucas held my other hand tightly. His presence was the only tether keeping me from floating away into the void of shock. I had survived. But the cost of my survival was finally brutally clear. To find freedom, I had to break the chains of my family once and for all. The battle to break free. Through the chaos of Christmas, something inside me snapped into clarity. I knew then that survival meant more than just leaving my mother's house. It meant erasing the invisible chains that still bound me to her. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I cut off all contact. I blocked Margaret's number first, then Olivia's. One by one, I added every distant cousin, every aunt, every tenuous connection that might serve as her messenger. Each click felt both liberating and terrifying. My hands trembled as I deleted decades of family photos from my phone and social media. Birthdays, graduations, even the rare smiles I had once clung to as proof that maybe things weren't so bad. Each deletion was a small death, a severed tether. By the end, my chest ached as though I had carved out a piece of myself. Lucas stood by me through all of it. He changed my passwords, created a new email account, secured my online presence like a fortress. Every step he took reminded me that love could be protective without being suffocating. Still, the silence that followed was eerie. That first week, without the constant static of Margaret's voice in my ear, the world felt unnaturally still, like the quiet after a storm when you don't yet know if it will return. I buried myself in work to fill the void. I stayed late at the office, volunteering for stories no one else wanted, chasing leads until my eyes blurred from staring at the screen. My finger, still swollen and tender from the Christmas attack, pulsed with pain whenever I typed too long. Lucas noticed, and one evening he brought me a simple silver chain. "Until you can wear it again," he said softly, sliding my engagement ring onto it so I could keep it close without the pressure on my hand. I kissed him in gratitude, holding back tears. When colleagues asked about the bandages on my hand, I forced a laugh. "Kitchen accident," I said. It was easier than the truth. But Margaret wasn't finished with me. On a Thursday morning, Clara, my editor-in-chief, summoned me into her office. Clara was a seasoned journalist, mid-40s, sharp-eyed and unshakable. But that day, her face was clouded with unease. "Elly," she began carefully, "I received a call about you. From your mother." The air drained from my lungs. "She claimed you've been stealing documents from the investigative desk and that you're unstable." Clara's tone softened, but her words still landed like daggers. I stammered, then handed her the police report from Christmas, the official record of Margaret's attack. Clara read it slowly, her expression hardening into sympathy. "I believe you," she said finally. "But Elly, she's called 3 times yesterday. Twice this morning. If this continues, it could damage your credibility here. It could affect promotions." I nodded, but inside I felt the floor give way. 3 years of relentless work, late nights, exclusive scoops, chasing truth even at personal risk, and now Margaret was poisoning the well I had fought so hard to reach. When I left Clara's office, the newsroom buzzed as usual, but I moved through it in a haze. My hand shook as I pressed the elevator button, holding my breath until the doors closed. Lucas was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with 2 coffees and my favorite breakfast sandwich. He smiled, but the second he saw my face, his expression shifted. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly, handing me the cup. I told him everything: Margaret's accusations, the threats to my career, the fear gnawing at me that she could destroy everything. His jaw tightened. "We're not letting her do this," he said firmly. "We'll file harassment charges. Today." That evening, we sat across from his sister, Emily, at her law office. Emily was 35, a formidable attorney with a halo of unruly curls and the kind of commanding presence that made even seasoned judges take note. She listened intently, jotting notes as I recounted every incident. "You need documentation," Emily instructed. "Every call, every message, every false report. Don't rely on memory. Write it down. We'll build a record she can't deny." For the next week, Lucas and I became archivists of our own nightmare. I saved voicemails laced with venom, emails dripping with accusation, and notes from coworkers who had received strange messages from concerned relatives. By the end, we had compiled 30 pages of evidence. Emily flipped through the thick stack, nodding. "This is excellent. We'll file for a restraining order tomorrow morning." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope flicker. But Margaret was always one step ahead. That Saturday, a violent pounding rattled our front door. I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. Lucas peeked through the peephole, then turned to me, his face grim. "It's the police," he whispered, pulling me gently toward the bedroom. My pulse thundered in my ears as 2 officers entered, their voices calm but firm. The older one cleared his throat. "We received a report that you're being held captive here, ma'am. That your fiancé is abusing you." I almost laughed. It was so absurd, but the sound died in my throat. I forced myself to steady my voice. "That's not true." I retrieved the police report from Christmas, the medical records of my injured finger, and the neatly organized binder Emily had helped me prepare. My hands trembled as I presented them. The younger officer flipped through the pages, sighing heavily. "4th time this week," he muttered. "Family disputes, false claims. Look, if you want this to stop, you need to petition for a no-contact order. Otherwise, she'll keep finding ways to send us here." They left as quickly as they came, but the damage lingered. I sat on the couch afterward, knees drawn to my chest, shaking as though my body couldn't contain the fear. Lucas wrapped me in a blanket, an old knit quilt his grandmother had made, and carried a steaming mug of chamomile tea to my hands. He kissed the top of my head. "You're safe," he whispered. "I promise. You're safe." But as I sat there, cocooned in his arms, I realized something chilling. Margaret wasn't trying to hurt me anymore. She was trying to erase me, to make me look insane, unreliable, unworthy of trust. And if I didn't fight harder, she just might succeed. The battle turns brutal. The gossip spread like wildfire. Margaret whispered to neighbors that I was spiritually kidnapped by Lucas, and soon Mrs. Chen, who used to greet me warmly in the hallway, avoided eye contact altogether. The man from 3B stopped Lucas by the elevator one night, fists clenched, asking if I was safe. Then came Olivia. She called Lucas at midnight, slurring into his voicemail. "Elly, you've ruined everything." Tom left me because of this family circus. If you had behaved, I would still have my happiness. I wanted to scream that Tom was an abuser, that she was better off without him, but deep down I knew Olivia had made her choice. She chose loyalty to the dysfunction she grew up in, while I chose freedom. By Tuesday, the lawsuit had been filed. For a brief moment, I exhaled. But Margaret wasn't finished. On Thursday morning, Clara, my editor, pulled me aside again. Her face carried the weary expression of someone caught between care and exhaustion. "Elly," she said softly, "your mother has been calling different departments, telling them you smuggle information and use drugs in the parking lot. She even reached out to one of our largest clients, accusing you of stealing data." My knees buckled. I collapsed into the chair opposite her. Clara squeezed my hand. "We know the truth. But you need to understand, promotions depend on reputation. This noise may delay things." I drove home in tears, parking in the dark corner of the lot. Lucas met me with his phone in hand, his jaw tight. "She's telling people we're part of a cult," he said. "My mom just got a call from her hairstylist asking if I'm your prophet." Despite my misery, laughter burst out of me. It was so absurd, so twisted, that I had no choice but to laugh. Emily, however, remained dead serious when Lucas told her. "She's using the word cult as code for feminism," Emily said bluntly. "Don't underestimate how persuasive she can sound when she plays the victim." The rumors spiraled out of control. I was a drug addict. I was pregnant with another man's child. Lucas was trafficking me. Each fabrication gained traction because Margaret's tears made people believe. At work, the HR department installed caller ID filters just to block her harassment. Lucas and I tried to reclaim peace by planning a small courthouse wedding. Nothing fancy, just rings, vows, and a fresh beginning. But Margaret discovered the plan through a distant cousin who worked at the records office. Emily called in a rush. "Elly, she has connections there. We need to change everything immediately." A fragile victory. One late evening, I arrived home to find our front door ajar. My chest tightened as I pushed it open. The apartment was in disarray. Work clothes slashed to ribbons, pages of scripture taped to the walls, and across the bathroom mirror, written in black marker, "I gave you life. I can take it away." The security footage confirmed our worst fears. Margaret had entered using Olivia's spare key. This was no longer gossip. This was crime. The police officers who viewed the footage didn't hesitate. "This is clear evidence of criminal trespass and threat," one said, shaking his head. Emily immediately expanded the lawsuit to include charges of breaking and entering, property destruction, and making death threats. Case moved quickly. Trial, Margaret stood defiant, but the evidence spoke louder than her trembling voice. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with an additional 18 months for the break-in, another year for property damage, and 3 years for threats. With good behavior, she might be released after 18 months. Still, the ruling included something far more important to me: a restraining order banning her from contacting me for the next 10 years, and mandatory restitution for the damages she had caused. For the first time in years, I breathed without fear. Olivia, shaken by her mother's imprisonment, finally began therapy. Slowly, she admitted the patterns of manipulation she had grown up under. It was a beginning, fragile but real. Meanwhile, Clara stood by me at work, defending my reputation to every department that had heard Margaret's poison. She didn't just preserve my career. She reminded me that not all authority figures demanded obedience. Some offered support. And Lucas, he remained my anchor through it all. On the morning of our rescheduled wedding, we exchanged vows at a quiet courthouse. No drama, no chaos, just love, steady and simple. The freedom I had longed for was no longer an abstract dream. It was here. It was real. Even when news arrived that Margaret had been released early, I did not crumble. Lucas squeezed my hand and I whispered, She no longer owns me. 3 lessons I learned. Looking back, there are 3 lessons I want to share, lessons carved from fear, endurance, and eventually freedom. 1. Protect your boundaries relentlessly. Family ties can be a source of comfort, but when they become shackles, you must cut them off. Blocking numbers, changing emails, and documenting every detail felt extreme, but it saved me. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. 2. The truth needs allies. If Clara hadn't believed me, if Emily hadn't fought for me, if Lucas hadn't stood beside me, Margaret's lies might have destroyed everything. Sometimes strength means reaching out, admitting you can't fight alone, and letting trustworthy people hold up the truth with you. 3. Healing is choosing freedom again and again. Even after the trial, after the sentencing, the temptation was there to let fear rule me. But healing is a choice, a decision to laugh at absurd rumors, to celebrate small victories, and to keep walking forward. Every day I chose freedom until it became natural. A note to you. If you've followed my story until this point, I want to tell you, you are not powerless. No matter how heavy the chains of manipulation, there is a way forward. You deserve a life free from control, free from fear, and filled with people who honor the real you. So, if my journey touched something in your heart, I ask you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps more voices like mine break the silence and find strength. Together, we can turn pain into power,